Yeah, hello and welcome to another small stream. So it has been a while, but yeah, I'm still alive and kicking, and I'm still doing agile transformations. So my name is Dennis Hofe, and enjoying you to have you around. Just before I go to bed, a few thoughts on KPIs, key performance indicators. So when we are in a company, we are often confronted with balanced scorecards, KPIs, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, then let's come up with a real life example in your everyday's life of a key performance indicator. Um, Imagine you have a room and there's the thermometer and you have a heating system and your room is really cold and it shows you 10 degrees Celsius, and then your key performance indicator for your heating indicates that your heating doesn't work at all. And if it's maybe 25 degrees, then it's maybe slightly too warm in the middle of winter. Oh, wait. Right now summer, but let's pretend that would be winter. Then your heating would be performing well. And the key performance indicator for you is your thermometer, the temperature in the room. And in a nutshell, this is what KPIs are about. They are somehow measuring a situation and say it's a number, and then you define what is a good number and what is not a good number, and if you're on the good side, then you're done. So a good key performance indicator in a company is money. Yeah, so if you say, for instance, I want to spend 100,000 euro in my company this year, and you have a cost tracking mechanism, then your KPI could be how much have you used of the 100,000 euro. And if you're, let's say, 11 months into the year, so in November, and you have used approximately an 11th of 12, so 11 out of 12 portions of your money, then you're right on track. And you might just say, okay, I'll have 1 month left and I have exactly the right amount of money left as well. So this is one example. So when you're doing Agile, you are, or if you do projects, you have also a key performance indicator, which might be time elapsed and how much stuff you have achieved. Yeah, so essentially, if you say 50% of the time has elapsed and 50% of the stuff I wanted to do is done, then you're probably also right on time. The problem, though, is that unlike thermometers and temperature or money, is how do you measure that you have actually accomplished 50% of the work? And this is where it gets super tricky. But we won't go into that detail today. We're just saying this is quite difficult, but there are things in Agile which are story points. Yeah, so basically a number which says this is how many numbers. There's a number which tells you how many what the complete backlog has. Yeah, so let's say if you want to build a product and you have 1,000 user stories describing your product and each of them is 10 story points, then you have probably 10,000 story points in your backlog. And if you have a velocity of 20, so you're burning every 2 weeks, you're accomplishing 20 story points, and let's assume for a second your backlog is not changing, then 10,000 divided by 20 is the number of weeks it will take. So almost endless, but nevertheless, yeah. So this is one could be a key performance indicator, but here comes the problem. When we measure money or temperature, there is, let's say, a little bit less human being involved usually. And it's also very black and white. Yeah. So there's very little room for interpretation. If you have defined 24 degrees as a perfect temperature, if you wanted to spend 100,000 and you're above the temperature or above the budget, there's no sort of interpretation possible. You're above. When it comes to story points, it's not an exact science how these story points are put together. If you, for instance, put a lot of stress on yourself and you are reducing your spend, essentially. You will see an impact on the money. If you're putting a lot of stress on yourself when it is around story points, you can also influence the team who's estimating the story points, the complexity of tasks. That's what story points are. And they will maybe start to game. Yeah. So if you say 20 is not enough, I need 30 story points per sprint, they just might estimate all stories a little bit more complex, whilst then reality of not as complex. And then your velocity goes up. Or what is more likely to happen is that people are making compromises on scope or quality. So this is normal human behavior, and this is a problem with key performance indicators, because as soon as you start measuring people performance, they will try to improve. And if the pressure is too strong, they try to improve no matter what. Lose very important aspects, security aspects, quality aspects, scope aspects, or other things like their personal development or work-life balance. Yeah, they'll try to do this. So Agile KPIs, key performance indicators, I think is from a wording perspective already not great. You know, I mean, if you take it literally, the performance of a team is not really the velocity at the end of the day, but is maybe more the value they bring to the company over a period of time. It would be a good performance indicator if you would have value on stories and you would be able to deliver value, really cash, essentially, because then if people start to game this thing, would be different, yeah, as long as we can't negotiate basically too much and interpret the value of these things. But if there would be a fixed value to something, it would be at least an incentive. It's harder to game. You would still maybe incur things like bad work-life balance and these things, but it is a slightly better performance indicator in terms of how much money you're making. It's a bit more black and white and less easy to game. Also from a scope perspective or quality perspective, it's these things normally don't bring the value if you're making compromises on quality or scope. So, and there is something which is called DORA KPIs. So this is coming from the world of DevOps, and DORA is basically a book written, where is it? Here we go. Book written from Nicole Forsgren and Jess Humble and Jin Kim. And they together found out through research that there are 4 KPIs which sort of fit to most enterprises. I don't know, thousands of them, where they seem to build the best backbone. And these 4 KPIs are lead time and change failure rate and mean time to recovery, and deployment frequency. So now we have discussed story points, or a complexity measure, money and temperature. Now we have 4 new KPIs which are measuring against something different. And again, the problem is that there's the word performance in there. There are key indicators. And from the book, they say it's also in terms of performance, it makes for them complete sense, because they say if they say you're low, mid, high, and elite performer, I think these days. So they have 4 buckets, and if if you deploy more than so and so many times a week or a day or a month, then you're in the elite performer bucket. And they have for all these things buckets, and they say when you're good at all KPIs or excellent, then you're probably in this elite region. There is the theory that if you start measuring something, you start to influence the behavior right away. So even if you don't say to anyone, look at this KPI, do something different tomorrow, take it into account, discuss it, optimize it. Yeah, if you don't do these things, if you just put a measurement there, it'll do something to the people. It'll change the behavior because they have a visual reflection, and when we talk about those 4 KPIs of their work, the quality of their work, the release pane, the level of automation, and it'll change their behavior already a little bit. If you're then in a company which is around performance, where people are paid based on performance, the word performance in your reviews, so how good is your yearly performance, you have your performance rating and key performance indicators, unfortunately share the same word, performance. And putting too much stress on these KPIs is as much provoking false behavior than or can potentially create false behavior. False behavior means, again, working too many hours, putting too much stress on yourself because maybe there is, say, very little influence on why, for instance, your deployment rate is really low. If you have a third-party application and they give you a patch once per year, then you have a deployment frequency of 1. If your management is starting to beat you up for it and you're starting to make crazy things in order to let the deployment frequency go higher, just the number, then it'll be interesting if there's any value in this really, if you put stress on it. So ideally, these indicators, these figures who are really great in measuring, let's say, the 360-degree angles of a software deployment and development team, but also of a configuration team. So that is ideally done by the team itself. So when you say key performance indicators, it's team performance indicators visible for the team only. They will apply pressure to themselves to a certain degree, but they will do it in a way that they say, I have a deployment frequency of 1. It's something which is outside our level of influence, so we won't stress about it. But what we also have is a mean time to recovery. And that's something we can influence because these are our servers, and we can maybe use images in order to quicker set them up or have a hot standby mechanism. So whatever it is, so whatever is in your level of influence, when you think, okay, there is really something we want to work on, because now we see that there's a problem or there's a new patch coming out and suddenly your MTTR, mean time to recovery or restore recovery, is degrading, and you can have a proper debate with the third-party supplier and say, guy, we have evidence that your new patch is making our system slower in recovery speed. So this is where they are really useful KPIs. They are really a problem if you put pressure on them. And this is nothing about your company culture or anything. It's really about what's in people's head when they hear key performance indicators. So my strong recommendation is to use measure points, to visualize these things, because a team who is in the continuous improvement spirit or wants to get into it, wants to try it, they want to see or need to see progress. And sometimes the progress is almost invisible. If you're coming out of a legacy application, changing a lot of things, and have high aspirations, but you're slowly getting there only. But once you see that there is, let's say, a felt benefit in this application, so for instance, the deployment pain becoming far less because you've automated more system and integration tests, and it's getting slowly together, and you can also see that in the graph how it's increasing, and you can proudly share this with your stakeholders and say, here guys, we have improved, and also celebrate it yourself. This is where it becomes really powerful, a powerful reward mechanism. And I think this is, to celebrate success, to be transparent about it in the team, to see what influences those KPIs positively or negatively, and then trying more or less of these things in order to further improve, to have a good discussion based on facts and figures with your stakeholders, business stakeholders, whatever it is, around certain things, and also argue around, let's say the customer says mean time to recovery is really shit, and you are saying, well, it's the same shit as in the last 6 years, my dear. You have a better discussion around what the customer means. If you didn't have the number, you probably have just a gut feeling to work against. And so I think this is just a few examples. I mean, there are probably endless. Of course, if you're going down the perform, if you're more mature and you have these KPIs and you sort of try to game them in order to become in the elite area, great. I would also say it is a way to argument for technical improvements. Yeah, so when you say, for instance, we need to install .NET version 4.5.6 or whatever is most recent, and you would say, how does that influence our system? I mean, it's a work. It's work for a week. So we spent a full week on this topic. So why would we do this? And if you could say, yeah, because the mean time to recovery is increasing, or deployment frequency is increasing, or change failure rate is decreasing, then people would say, once everyone has grasped that these KPIs are really key for them, then they start to grasp the importance. And once you've done this and you've seen a positive impact, even better. So this is all I wanted to say. At the end of the day, watch out if you're starting to introduce KPIs, if you're a Scrum Master or an Agile coach. Make sure the team understands the usefulness. Try to take away the fear of that they're getting measured. And very importantly, try to make use of them very early on to show where they're hitting actually the main interest of the team.